Today I wanted to take a trip into the backlogs. We're going to be exploring a game that's been sitting neatly on my shelf just waiting for its chance to shine. Waiting for the day that I was feeling bored enough to actually give it a try. That game is Mad Max. Now realistically, the entire reason I even opened this game in the first place was because a commenter a few months back tossed an idea out there suggesting that I try and beat the game with no upgrades. And I love a good excuse to play a game I'm not in the slightest familiar with for the very first time in a completely unconventional way. So here we are. Little did I know, this game pretty much revolves around upgrading your car as well as Max to progress throughout the story, even going as far as making upgrades essential to move through it. Though you can just remove these immediately afterwards, but we'll get into more of that later. I had no previous experience with this game and have consumed almost no content on it since its release, so I was going into this challenge pretty much blind. But after running through this game, I think I might continue to do so, because it's actually a pretty fun game. It's much better than that broken piece of crap Ubisoft wants to call a game. Sorry, I'd originally planned on this video being a Splinter Cell Blacklist challenge, but after 8 crashes within the span of the first mission, I'll probably never touch that game ever again. Tangent aside, as the title says, my goal for today's video is to beat Mad Max with 0 upgrades. Let's see if it's possible. As with most games, it all started with a light tutorial. I woke up in the middle of a desert as a dehydrated Max who was being woken up by an injured dog licking my face. He'd go on to act as my Sherpa as he guided me to a small reservoir of water where I could fill my canteen. Then he'd move on to lead me to a hunchback having monster who had captured my furry friend and looked like he was about to devour him for lunch. I dissuaded this creature from doing so and we quickly formed a partnership. I was looking for my ride and he'd seen it somewhat recently. This dude had a buggy of his own but was broken down at the moment. All it needed was some wire to get it going again, so continuing this tutorial, I made my way to a local camp to learn some combat basics and harvest a broken vehicle for its wiring. Once I'd got back to the hunchback known as Chum, he'd fix up his buggy while I loaded up the dog. Then we'd take off for the cover of his sanctum. Upon arrival, he'd present me with my new ride, which was mostly just a frame with an engine and 4 wheels. It was now time to get to work building this thing into a vehicle worthy of the sand behind its bumper. Aptly named the Magnum Opus, my mission was now to head off to the graveyard to secure a body for this hunk of scrap metal. However, this wasn't going to be as simple as it sounds. The graveyard is well known to be guarded by Scrotus's warboys. Getting in, however, went as smooth as sheet metal. I got to pick from 5 different bodies to place upon the Opus's shell, and went with the Wild Hunt because it reminded me of The Witcher. So, you know how I said getting in was easy? Yeah, well, getting out was a different story. As soon as I dropped the body down to Chum, I was now trapped in a makeshift cage match between me and a medium-sized group of warboys. Being that it's the beginning of the game, I'm not expected to have too much in terms of upgrades, and I don't, so these guys weren't really too much of a challenge. And after defeating them and escaping the graveyard, Chum, the Opus, and I rode back to the safety of the sanctum. Except, it wasn't all that safe of a journey. But after learning some basics of car combat and taking out the few enemy cars in my path, we did make it back safely. Back inside the sanctum, I now rummaged around to find some spare scrap as well as a jag tip, so Chum could now outfit the Opus with a harpoon. This will be useful for pulling down certain doors and scarecrows as well as crippling hostile vehicles. Now, technically, this is an upgrade, but it's the very base model and there's no going back from it. But also, there's no going forward without it. There will be a handful more of these mandatory upgrades as we move along this tutorial phase, and there's nothing I can do about it. So I won't be considering them upgrades per se. I'm forced to upgrade my ramming grill to the tussle bar here as well, but I'll be sure to be taking this off later when I realize that's an option. Leaving the sanctum, I now get to play around with my newly installed toy by pulling down some of the handful of scarecrows littering the local landscape, doing my part to liberate this area of Scrotus's forces. Once I'm done with this, I'm introduced to a mysterious wanderer named Griffa. He's the one I'd want to talk to if I ever wanted to upgrade the various buffs he offers. Now, since this game forces me to talk to him on this one occasion, I reluctantly had to spend the 3 tokens I've earned up to this point. So I spent them on the most innocuous ones of the bunch, those being extra scrap and ammo from looting and reduced fuel consumption. On the way back to the sanctity of our sanctum, I outfitted the Opus with some nitro, then got to test it out on a conveniently placed ramp. Also at this point, removing Max's jacket to make him look a little more sexy, to make him look a little more suited for this run. Unfortunately, my efforts to clear this area of hostile threats were in vain, as the next thing I knew, Stankgum's legion of goons were raiding our sanctum and blowing it to bits. In order to find a place where we could lie low for a while and let Stankgum's men clear off, Chum mentions that a man named Jeet, the leader of the next area over, may be able to help us out. Or he'd just kill us. It was a 50-50 shot. Well, since he's our only option, we took off in the direction of his stronghold, ripping down any scarecrows I'd pass along the way, thinking that maybe I'd gain some favor with Jeet before meeting him. Fortunately, he lets us in and even lets us take a spare trigger he had laying around so Chum can manufacture us a sniper rifle. This little hunchback was quite handy. We were now off to Dead Baron's Pass, and on the way there, I'd managed to take out a local convoy and secure my first car mount. Now, I didn't know at the time that these had any benefit to the Opus, so I equipped it out of sheer ignorance, but I assure you, I'd remove it after finding all this out. Once I'd arrived at the pass, I fought my way inside through some warboys and up to a good vantage point to get some eyes on this legend of the wastelands called the Jaw. It was basically just a huge gate that would hinder my progress forward, so I'd need to figure out a way to destroy it. After I'd finished up my scouting mission, I'd gotten a notification that Griffa was spotted in my area, and I'd noticed when I'd visited him earlier that there was an option to undo all upgrades, so I went off to see him to inquire if I could go about removing these upgrades he'd given me earlier. And this is where I'd messed up. After engaging Griffa in conversation yet again, he won't let you leave until you've spent whatever points you have with him. And suspiciously, the undo all button didn't live up to its intended function. This, unfortunately, led to me sorta failing the run by spending the 2 Griffa tokens I'd accumulated, as there was no other option for me here. I'd even tried reloading a previous save, but this game is based solely on autosaves, so it was a frivolous effort. Okay, to get past the Jaw, I needed to now turn the Opus into an Archangel called the Jack. This meant I had to, once again, unwillingly upgrade my ride a total of 5 more times. Though I didn't quite have the scrap to do all this just yet. So Chum and I went off to complete the next task on our list, using one of the many hot air balloons scattered around the desert. These would give me the ability to spot all the points of interest in the area and mark them on my map. After getting back down and off of the balloon, I now needed to seek out my future Archangel's car body. Instead of heading straight there though, I took a quick detour/pit stop to blow up one of the enemy camps for some easy extra scrap. Once I'd snagged the Jack body, I was then tasked with obtaining a total sum of 300 scrap. I had around 200 to my name already, so this shouldn't be that hard to manage. I set off to take out yet another one of these larger enemy camps, but this one was a bit different from the last. This one was a top dog camp, an enemy camp with a larger boss at its end. And truthfully, getting to him proved to be a tougher challenge than the man himself. But once all was said and done, I had the 300 scrap I needed to move on. The Jack was nearly complete, but just needed one more piece: armor. For this, I'd need to visit Guttash's stronghold for some welding wire. But before heading over there, I'd go ahead and take out yet another convoy for shits and giggles. I'd upgraded the Jack as much as I needed to at this point, but Guttash needed something from me before letting me move on. He needed me to take out one of those enemy camps I'd mentioned earlier in his area, so I went on to do just that. Unfortunately, picking one of the worst camps I could have possibly chosen to complete this mission. Seriously, the camps where you're tasked with exploding a bunch of different transfer tanks are the most time-consuming and frustrating camps in the game. Nonetheless, I'd still manage to wipe it out, then head back to Guttash for my next mission. As if I wasn't doing enough for this man already, he now wanted me to find a convoy led by a dude named Dimrim and wipe it off the map. Fine. Convoys are some of the toughest enemy forces to go up against with an unupgraded Opus. You can get overwhelmed pretty quickly since you're always going to be outnumbered, and the Opus, at this point, is stunningly weak. However, I did manage to take him down and secure his hood ornament as requested by Guttash, then went back over to Jeets to see what was next on my list of things to do. And before moving forward, he wanted me to first build the dog and buggy part of his stronghold. As I set out to do this, I had that moment of realization that I was talking about earlier, and quickly rushed to downgrade everything I could off the Opus, taking a mental note to do this more immediately in the future, should I encounter it again. And trust me, this wasn't even close to the last time I'd need to do this. All that was needed from me to complete this dog and buggy outfit in Jeet's stronghold was to head to what was left of the sanctum and retrieve both Dinky D and Chum's buggy. After doing that, I could continue my journey through Jeet and install the last part of the permanent upgrades of the Opus, the Thunderpoon. Now I was finally ready to take on the jaw. So, boarding the Opus with Chum in the back and Thunderpoons on deck, we were off to break down that wall and make it into Pink Eye's domain. Barely. Upon reaching her stronghold, we'd find that Stankgum's legion of goons had infiltrated here as well. So, with our dinky little non-upgraded Opus, I went about ramming their cars until they'd explode. But not without mine nearly exploding a few times first. After their squad of cars were dealt with, I then had to focus on the 3 catapults they'd placed outside that were firing upon the outside walls of the stronghold. Using the harpoon to open their backside and revealing a few fuel tanks would give me an opening to toss one of these nearby explosive spears into them and put them out of commission. Well, I'd either use these or do a drive-by with my shotgun. Once the outside forces were all suppressed, I could continue to push further inside, running into more of Stankgum's blue and purple friends while on foot. They were significantly stronger than your typical warboy, but I still didn't have too much trouble getting inside. But once I was, that's where the trouble really started for me. There were a literal gang of these dudes that I'd now need to face, all wanting a piece of that sweet underkitted Maximilian ass. As per usual with me and difficult sections in games, the third time's the charm here. Once I was past this fight, I was now somewhat friendly with Pink Eye. Just as this new friendship was formed, I was now off to Gastown to make nice with the leader there. And as is customary up to this point, I went ahead and took out yet another one of those convoys I just so happened to catch up with on my way over there. We're headed over there to talk to the Outcrier so he could give us his approval to enter us into the races. Pretty vague, but okay. The Outcrier, who was the leader of Gastown, in typical RPG fashion, required us to run an errand for him before giving us his blessing to enter these races. This errand takes us to the Underdune, a place literally no one wants to go. It's located out in the Dunes region and is controlled by the Buzzards, a group that doesn't fuck around. They pretty much keep to themselves and aren't kind of foreigners in their land. Kinda sounds familiar, hitting a little too close to home. The Underdune is an airport that was taken over and buried by the desert sands, and we were going here to find some light bulbs for the Outcrier so he could decorate his stronghold and make it a little more inviting. Now, maneuvering around in here with the Opus is kind of a nightmare. It's littered with rubble and destruction, which causes it to be quite cramped and claustrophobic. Through it all, I finally reached the location that was most likely to have the bulbs I needed, and after proceeding in on foot, I had a feeling I was going to be in for a pretty rough time. Especially because the Buzzards kept stalking me as I crept ever closer to my destination, menacingly keeping their distance. And, of course, as expected, after grabbing the bulbs and turning around to get back to the Opus, I'd get the doors and windows slammed in my face, restricting my every form of exit. It was an ambush. These little underground dwelling freaks are a much different beast than anyone I've come across up to this point. They're super quick little fuckers that are very keen on doing a specific move that I cannot parry. Also, what truly made this fight harder was the underutilization of a dodge mechanic that I just really wasn't privy to at this point. There's enough of these little fuckers that even when I'm in Fury mode and doing finishers, they're consistently landing hits on me while I'm locked into this position. I surprisingly managed to get through this fight on my first attempt, but foolishly missed the part where I was supposed to zipline down to the Opus, and instead, just jumped to my death. Awesome. But after about 3 more tries, naturally, I successfully got through it again and managed to zipline down to safety. Kind of. With literally 0 health to Max's name, I'm now in a scramble to get the hell out of here, all while traps and buzzards in cars try to put a stop to me. All this over some light bulbs? Sheesh. Thankfully, I made it back to Gastown and got the nod from the Outcrier to finally take part in the races. With this, I was headed over to speak to Crowdazzle. He was the head honcho in charge of organizing the races around these parts. I went to recruit a local fighter, Tenderloin, but she can't join me just yet as she has a debt that needed to be worked off first, and apparently I'm the man for the job. In order to do this, I had to complete a few separate tasks within the Barrens. Reduce the threat of Pink Eye's territory to 3, defeat Rimjobby for a new coat of paint, then collect 1600 scrap to upgrade my ride. The longest task to complete of the 3 would be reducing Pink Eye's territory's threat. This was obviously because the Opus was not very well equipped to tackle the objectives needed to do so this late in the game. I mostly relied on taking out all the scarecrows and snipers that I could, as they're able to be either harpooned off their perch or rammed into oblivion. However, there was at least one camp I could access without needing to ram through or rip down a massive door. Though I do know now that there are certain routes around some of these doors that Max can slip through on foot, but being that I was new to this game, I didn't take advantage of them. Rimjobby's camp was in Gutash's territory, so you know it was going to be an easy time. And honestly, these top dog fights are incredibly easy to cheese. Just create some distance, let them charge at you, then dodge roll and beat on them until they regain enough stamina to block your attacks. Then rinse and repeat. Except, as I mentioned earlier, I didn't really know about the dodge roll during this run, so I resorted to just running around frantically, trying to bait them into swinging and missing on me instead. Returning to Pink Eyes, I upgraded everything necessary on the Opus in order to qualify my car into the race. Then immediately downgraded everything back to stock and went back to speak with Crowdazzle to begin the death run. Unfortunately, even though I'd reverted the Opus to its former shame, I'd only be able to use the upgraded version of it called the Speed Demon. With the performance of this beast, this race is a cakewalk, finishing the barrel bash in first place and with 39 seconds to spare. I went back to speak with Tenderloin since her debt was now paid off and she was now willing to be recruited as my fighter in the real race against Stankgum. However, before I could go to Gastown and start the race, I needed to upgrade Max Knuckle Duster's jacket and wrist armor, all of these being upgraded then subsequently downgraded like I've been doing all along. After reporting back to the Outcrier in Gastown, I get this message on screen warning me about the difficulty of the upcoming race and how I should make sure that Max and the Opus are well upgraded before continuing. But I ignored it and continued on anyways, since that's the whole goal of this run. That message, well, it wasn't kidding. This was one tough race. I was initially up against Stankgum and 4 of his goons when beginning this race, but more would soon enter the track as we made our way through it. With his cronies doing everything they possibly could to blow my vehicle up, traps littered throughout the course, and Stankgum having a few tricks up his sleeve, the Opus barely stood a chance. After several attempts at this race and getting to hear Tenderloin's voice line over and over again, I'd eventually come up with a solution to this race. I'd held off using the Thunderpoons as I felt that they were a little cheap and I wanted to see if I could complete this part without them. But inevitably I realized that this was a pointless effort as the Opus had very little defense, being that it had no armor, and ramming Stankgum's vehicle wasn't going to work out for me. However, even with the use of the Thunderpoons, I still would have plenty going against me during this death race. Stankgum's buddies would be constantly harassing me, pushing me into walls, traps, or just pinning me into a pit maneuver, which did substantial damage to the Opus. So I'd need to avoid them at all costs. This was hurdle number 1. Hurdle number 2 was Stankgum himself. He had bombs that he dropped behind him that were extremely deadly, so I couldn't ride too close behind him. And he had sideburners, so I couldn't ride alongside and smash into him. The more detrimental of these two were the bombs, since they bounced rather unpredictably, unlike the flames shooting out the sides of his vehicle. So my plan after multiple failures ended up being to start the race off by getting as close to Stankgum's ride as quickly as possible, then trying to push his cronies into the bombs he'd dropped behind him. Oh, real quick, I forgot to mention that I had an explosive strapped to my car as well, giving me only 7 minutes to finish this race. Anyways, after boosting through the initial few enemies and catching up to Stankgum, I was able to keep up with him long enough to fire off 4 Thunderpoons into the back of his car before getting a little too close and losing control of the Opus, accidentally running over 2 consecutive bombs, quickly taking my health down to half. I'd recovered from this blunder and boosted back up to Stankgum, but Tenderloin was bugged out or something and unavailable to shoot any Thunderpoons, which led to me getting distracted and hitting another dropped mine. Thankfully, she'd recovered from whatever was going on and managed to quickly fire off 2 more shots, which led to him being put down for good and getting past this stupid ass race. Now, unbeknownst to me, I had to face Tenderloin in a 1v1 brawl. I guess this is why I needed to recruit a fighter specifically for this race. Once friend, now turned foe is quite a squirrely little adversary. She also gets to fight me with 2 daggers in her hands, which seems a little unfair, but that's fine. I tried treating her like any other warboy I had faced up to this point, but she was unlike any of them. She could pretty much dodge anything and had a signature move that would quickly slice me to pieces. This could have likely been easily countered with the dodge roll feature I neglected to use, but regardless, I relied more so on countering the one move of hers I was able to, and ran away from her when she performed her little blade dance. On my 3rd try, again, as per usual, I pretty much defeated Tenderloin since she had literally 0 health, but she stayed upright and sent me to the Shadow Realm as I was feeling a bit too cocky. This demoralized me slightly, as evidenced by my next attempt, as I found myself near death really early on in the fight. After considering a reset to the beginning once again, I instead quickly decided to see this one through, and funnily enough, this would be the one where I would find my victory. After my win over Tenderloin, Lord Scrotus wanted to take a crack at the 2-time champ. Big mistake, bucko. As annoying as this quote-unquote fight was, it wasn't all that much of a challenge. His warboys that came into the arena would drop weapons for me to use against their leader, and I sure as hell would whenever I had the opportunity. I even conned him into running into one of his 3 piles of oil barrels suspiciously positioned around the arena. The fight ended abruptly after a pipe broke and fell between the two of us, creating a divide in the arena, inviting me to find a way around and back to Scrotus so I could finish him off. After plowing through a couple of warboys, I'd eventually make it back to Scrotus and find him with a full health bar once again. Sweet. Using my same tactic as the first time, I made swift work of him all over again, picking up the dropped weapons his goonwood dropped after I dropped them, and whacking Scrotus into a never-ending stagger, until the weapon would break and I have to go find another. Though I did find myself figuring out how useful the dodge roll mechanic was during this encounter, so that's cool. The warboys that would join this fight were some of the tougher, like orange painted ones, but still not really much of a challenge. Again, at about half health, Scrotus would cheat me out of yet another victory by catching me off guard and pulling a scar from the Lion King on me. A woman named Hope would come to my aid and rescue me, bringing me back to Gastown to recover, and she was my next quest giver. In order for her to grant me her mission though, I needed to complete 2 projects in Deep Fria's stronghold and complete 3 wasteland missions. I'd apparently already completed one of the 3 wasteland missions, so I started my work on the other 2 of those first. The Outcrier's mission was first on my list, requiring me to steal Crodazzle's car and bringing it back to Gastown. This seemed easy enough, except his car is rigged with loud-ass speakers and caught the attention of a few nearby enemies. I'd avoid them by taking this thing off-road, though this would eventually get me stuck on a huge pile of trash as a storm tore through my position. But after making my way back to the road, I could safely get back to Gastown and turn in my quest. I then turned my attention to completing some projects for Deep Fria next, and after settling on working towards the water storage and oil well, I was off to the respective camps holding the required parts. These 2 were quite easy to build as they only required 1 part to complete, but then again, so did most things in this area. Once I'd punched through a bunch of blue and purple guys to obtain the required parts, I built both of them and put my focus back on the second wasteland mission I needed to complete, settling on finding Chum's Holy Wrench simply because it was extremely close by. Now, just outside of Gastown, there was a pipe I could open up and climb into, and this is where I would find what I was looking for. Though, I'd need to punch a few dudes in the face to get there. Either way, it was a simple enough task. Now I was back off to talk to Hope for my very next mission. She wanted my help getting her daughter back who was taken from her, but before skipping to step 2, I needed to complete step 1, which was infiltrating Stankgum's garage and stealing his ride. The way there was riddled with his legion of warboys, and did take a few attempts to put down, but this wasn't a very serious roadblock by any means. After stealing his car and taking it back to Deep Fria's, I now had a brand new V8 engine that was non-consensually installed into my Opus, so I made sure to remove that right away and ensured that nothing else was changed without me knowing. In order to find Hope's daughter, I'd need to now head back into the Forbidden Dunes region once again in hopes of finding the old man who was said to be the child's keeper. I managed to locate the old man, but found that he was no longer with us on this earth. There were, however, some fresh tire tracks in the sand that we decided to follow, which led us to a backside entrance to the Underdune. Back inside the Buzzard's lair once again, I knew I was in for some creature combat. I drove down until I could no longer, then continued in on foot. Chum got so scared at this point waiting alone back at the car that he decided to abandon me down here and took off in the Opus. Thanks, buddy. Since there was nothing I could do about it at this point, I decided to continue on with my mission. I found a few different buzzard child traps and tried looking for glory in each of the ones I could find, with no success. However, after checking the last one in the area I was in, I heard a loud rumbling noise and a scream, so I decided to head in that direction and see if it was possibly where they were keeping her. I eventually stumbled into a chest freezer that seemed out of place, and after opening it up, I finally found glory. After convincing her that I was only here to save her and that her mom was the one who sent me, she agreed to let me guide her out of here. As we made our way out, I wasn't sure how the heck we were gonna get out of here without a ride, but as we moved along, searching for an exit, some buzzards came barreling in with one of their own and tried to put a stop to us. From here, a fight ensued against myself and these enemies, but after ridding the area of them and their boss-like ally, Glory and I would hop into their car and I'd take her back to reunite her with her mom. Then I was off to head back to the Sanctum to confront Chum and take back the Opus. Little did I know, Stank Gum was here and I'd need to take care of him and some of his friends in a fistfight. Yet, he'd cheat a little bit by wielding a couple daggers, much like my fight with Tenderloin. And much like that fight, I'd take care of him in much of the same way, since these fights are pretty damn similar. Just a lot of sprinting around, waiting for him to do the attack that I could parry, then lay into him as much as I could while he was dazed. Again, avoiding the crazier moves that I couldn't. After his defeat, he told me that Scrotus had already been here and was now on his way back to Frias to take care of the family I'd just reunited. So, sadly, after rushing back to Deep Frias, I'd show up to find that I was already too late and Hope and Glory were now dead by the hands of Scrotus. There was now just one thing left to do. In my final showdown with Lord Scrotus, I was now put up against the largest convoy I'd ever run into. There were 8 cars in his entourage, not including the land mover that Scrotus was in. My initial focus was to take down these smaller 8 first before worrying about the big guy, since they would be a much bigger threat to my dinky little Opus. I'd try my best to deal as much damage as possible by bashing into them with the side of my vehicle, even going as far as to use their allies' weapons against them. But the Opus wasn't really all that strong, clearly. So there would be periodic breaks where I'd need to bail and let Chum fix her back up. Thankfully, the game gave me enough breathing room to do so. Every time the warning would show up on screen telling me to return to the land mover, I knew it was my cue to get back in the Opus and start blasting back up to the convoy. There was a grand total of 5 pit stop repairs required to be able to clear all 8 of Scrotus's entourage before I could begin picking apart his big rig. Once I'd tore off the panels of each side of the land mover and blew up the gas tanks behind them, this would close our chase and lead to his rig teetering on the edge of a cliff. After going against Chum's wishes and using the Opus to give the land mover the push it needed to tumble off the cliff, Scrotus somehow blasts out the back with a totally new ride. He wasn't quite finished just yet. All that was left for me to do was nail him with 2 hand-thrown thunderpoons as he tried to run me down with his car. And after the second poon was tossed and made contact, it would be the final nail in the Scrotus coffin, avenging Hope, Glory, Chum, and the Opus, all with one swift removal of his stupid lobotomy spike. Well, that was an interesting run. Like I said at the top of the video, I've never played Mad Max before, and this was my first experience with it, and I gotta say, I really enjoyed my time in this game's world. Although my ignorance of the game and its systems did lead to a few speed bumps in this run, I think overall it was a pretty thoroughly intact run. Did I maybe leave a required progression stalling upgrade on for a little too long near the beginning? Yes. Was I forced to spend 2 extra Griffa tokens while trying to remove the earlier gifted upgrades? Also yes. But I don't think either of these were grand enough offenses to push this challenge into a fail state, and the majority of the harder parts of this game were completed with a bare bones max and Opus, so I still consider this run intact. Feel free to disagree in a comment below or whatever. And that's all I have to say about Mad Max for now. I hope you enjoyed this video, even though it's a brand new game I'm featuring on my channel. I may have more runs planned for this game as well, so if you want to see that, or you just want more of my content to show up on your homepage, hit that subscribe button. Or don't, I'm not your dad. Thanks for stopping by and watching my video, and I'll see y'all in the next one. Bye-bye.